One area where I know people are getting triggered has to do with mask wearing. Those who say, I'm doing everything right, I'm following the rules. And then I see, people having a backyard party and they're not social distancing and nobody's wearing a mask. So what would you say about the anger that's coming up around this?
I mean, everybody has these very strong emotional connections to that, wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. How dare they not wear a mask and put me in danger? How dare they wear a mask and signal that we're losing our freedoms? And those strong emotional responses don't allow you to try to understand the other human being. You just condemn them and tell them, say how stupid they are or how naive they are. To me, the better method would be to put on your empathy cap and try to figure out, why do they believe that way? Be curious. And maybe if you can ask the question of them, like, why do you feel so strongly about mask or not wearing a mask? And get to know the reason behind that and get to know them as human beings. And my guess is you'll find you have a lot more in common than you think you do.
So in a real life situation in a supermarket, when a mask wearer sees a non-mask wearer and gets angry about that, are you suggesting in that moment to try to engage the person in conversation?
I don't know if that moment is the appropriate moment to do that. I just know for sure that if you start yelling at that person, it won't resolve that situation. So I'm thinking, do what it takes to protect yourself, number one. And then, we're going to have to start having these discussions that aren't memes on Facebook, because I think social media has allowed us to say things that we would never say to people in person. And it exacerbates the issue, and it escalates the violence. And I think we need to sit down and start talking to people. And if, I'm not sure exactly how to do that during COVID. Maybe it's just massive amounts of Zoom calls, but try to connect with people as human beings. Be curious instead of judgmental about their behavior. I can say, I think everyone should wear a mask in a public place, but if there are people that aren't, again, I think that's probably fear driven. The people wearing the mask are afraid of COVID-19 and all that means about maybe infecting them or infecting loved ones and possible, really horrible health consequences. And the persons that aren't wearing a mask, they're afraid that the government is taking over, and they're fearful. They're fearful of losing their freedom. And that's a pretty big thing. I mean, so if we can at least understand each other's point of view, at least we're less volatile in our reaction. We're saying, okay, I understand why that person's not wearing a mask, so I'm going to protect myself. Here's the other thing I've found, especially on social media. You cannot logic someone out of a way of believing if it's an emotional argument or response. It's impossible. If you have a statistic, in your eyes proves them wrong, they're just going to say, well, that's from a fake source, or that study was done by big pharma, or whatever justification they have, but they're going to not back off and say, gosh, I'm so glad you showed me that statistic. Now I believe a totally different way. It never happens that way. So I think how do you overcome those things? You have to have human to human connection. You have to understand each other as human beings. Find out, what are those things we're afraid of? What are those things we have in common? And what you're going to find is there's a lot more in common than you think. Even Trump versus Biden supporters.
And that's a good place to end this segment with you, Brent Darnell. We will talk with you about social injustice and the political scene coming up on the Help and Healing Hangout.